Today, we're going to be taking a look at 5 Pokemon that I think are underrated or on the rise in Regulation F, and these Pokemon you should definitely consider building around. So now, the first one I'm going to touch on here is, I feel like this is one I always talk about at the start of like every format that's being underrated, and that is Urshifu Dark, right? So obviously, you know, when you look at the two Urshifus, Urshifu Rapid Strike is obviously the better of the two right now. Why? Well, you know, it hits you 3 times. Obviously, you can break things like Focus Sash. It pairs incredibly well with Rain. Terra Water is just a lot better neutral typing than, you know, most of basically any other Terra type in the game right now. And because of that, you know, the Urshifu Rapid Strike does tend to be a little bit better. But the main thing is, right, a lot of people end up, you know, building towards trying to, you know, make sure their team is good against Urshifu Rapid Strike, right? For example, one of the, you know, the main answers to Urshifu Rapid Strike right now is Ogerpon and Water in particular, because, you know, it's a great redirection mon. Obviously, it has Water Absorb. It's fantastic, right? You even see, you know, a couple Gastrodons here and there creeping up. But Urshifu Dark is such a good mon, right? The only, like, really the only issue Urshifu Dark has is, you know, Fairy types. And obviously, in saying that, you know, Fluttermane is, you know, probably, sorry, I do believe it is the best Pokemon in the game right now. But outside of that, you know, this mon still does have a lot of things you can do, right? Obviously, you know, it has a pretty decent matchup into Incineroar, not as good as obviously Urshifu Rapid Strike, which again makes it a little worse. But this mon, it still puts out a lot of pressure, right? Like Adamant CCs are still absolutely chunking Incineroars at -1. Yeah, if you have a look at it, right? So like Wicked Blow here. Obviously, again, this only hits once. It kind of is missing that base 10 power, obviously, that it had in Generation 8. But still a very, very good move, right? Also has Sucker Punch, which is technically a better priority move than Aqua Jet. Only main issue, obviously, is like 1, you can't really get the, obviously, the rain boost out of it that you can with Aqua Jet. And 2, obviously, it can fail if they don't ready up an attack, which does kind of suck there. But Close Combat is also like another fantastic option, right? In terms of like items, now I do think there are a couple different ones you can go. Right now, I do think the Focus Sash set is the best set without a doubt. So, you know, you go something like that plus Detect, right? These 4 moves here, you go Focus Sash. You kind of just run like max with Adamant, right? Never go Jolly on your Urshifus as well. I feel like they just don't do enough damage with Jolly. I definitely think Adamant's the way to go, right? And in terms of Terra too, if you're going Sash, I definitely think Terra Dark, because you just want to get as much damage out of your Wicked Blows and Sucker Punches as possible. Other sets that I think are obviously really good as well. Obviously, there is the Dread Plate or the, you know, the Black Glasses, however you want to do it. Terra Dark, again, is still really, really good. But Terra Poison is also a really, really solid option as well, right? And obviously, it gives you, you know, it gives you a resist to obviously Fairy types, but also pairs really well with the Dark typing, because no one wants to click Psychic on you, right? Which is one of the main, you know, differences between, you know, Urshi Single Strike and Urshi Rapid. Urshi Rapid, you know, it does like going Terra Poison, because obviously, again, it helps you out, you know, with that Fairy weakness. But the main issue you have there, right, is that, you know, you're still weak to Psychic moves. And Psychic types are on the rise right now, especially, you know, Psyspam getting a couple new toys in this generation. Obviously, you know, making Psychic types a little bit better, right? So I definitely think the Dread Plate set is also really good. But the final one here too is just the Choice Band set. Again, you could also run Scarf on this one, but I think, you know, Terra Dark Band is just insane, right? I've had situations where, you know, you kind of get this mod in here and you probably just go like U-turn in that last slot, right? But you kind of get this mod into a situation where you've got speed control or like redirection next to it, and you just start one-shotting just neutral like mons. Like this just like, by the way, this just like one-shots Entei, right? Bulky Entei just get one-shot by this. And if you put this next to, you know, for example, like say, you know, Ogerpon Water or something, right? Or like, you know, the Entei just doesn't have max speed. All of a sudden, you're just one-shotting it. But yeah, I think Urshifu Single Strike is without a doubt just, it's super slept on. I honestly don't know why more people don't use this. I think the main issue probably is that Dark typing, just because there are a lot of good Dark types obviously people are running. Main one being Incineroar. Qian Pao's another good one as well. Obviously, like Qian Pao plus Urshi Rapid is like a really good combo. And Urshi Single Strike is still really good with Qian Pao, but obviously, again, pairing up that Dark typing, it can be a bit of an issue. But I've had a lot of success running this alongside, you know, some Tailwind hyper offensive teams. For example, like Whimsicott or like Sun variants of like, you know, the Tailwind HO. And yeah, because of that, I do think Urshi Single Strike is incredibly good and incredibly underrated. So the next thing I want to touch on here is actually a mon I've seen rising up a lot. And I do kind of want to touch on it here because it does play a big role in some of the mons we're going to touch on later. And that is Volcarona. And the main reason for Volcarona is Quiver Dance. So if anyone's seen any of the recent videos, I've basically been saying that I think this is the best setup has been for the entirety of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I think this is the metagame now where you've got the Incineroars, right? You've got the Rillabooms, you've got these double fake outs, Intimidate cycling, you've got all that good stuff, right? I truly think this is Volcarona's time to shine, or just set up switches in general, but Volcarona being one of the better ones, right? So the best set I've seen right now running around is the Lefties set. You go Lefties Flame Body, and then you run a Terra normally that resists Normally that resists like water, right? Because obviously Rapid is one of the main ones. So Dragon's really, really solid. I do think Grass and Water are both also decent options as well. But I do think right now, just a neutral typing Dragon is probably just the best, right? You're already a Fire type, so you don't care that much about the Fairy types. Again, you're also a Fire type already, so you don't care that much about the Ice types. And Dragon's just a neutral matchup anywhere, right? So when you have Dragon paired up with Flame Body, if Urshifu Rapid Strike hits you, it is just good night, right? Like basically the second you get the burn, right, you go lefties, you pair this with Rillaboom, the game is just done for Urshifu Rapid Strike at that point, right? And then in terms of the other moves you go, Heat Wave is obviously, your best Fire stab. Fiery Dance also is just like really, really good, really consistent, allows you to keep boosting up. And it's also just, it doesn't miss, which is also like super, super nice, right? Also you're always going like protecting the last slot here. But then the rest of it really comes down to your team, right? Like if you wanted, you don't have to run Protect, you could run something like Struggle Bug. I don't think you need the bug type move, but I do think Struggle Bug obviously gives a good niche. But really the main thing for me is Giga Drain, right? As I said before, I think the ability to set up and just survive is really, really good right now. We're seeing it with things like, Raging Bolt right now, right? They're going like Calm Mind plus Leftovers, they pair it up with Rillaboom or Amoonguss, and they basically just exist, right? They sit there, they keep healing up and whatnot. And Volcarona can do the exact same thing. Has a really, really solid speed tier base 100s, for def is really high. And then, while its defense is pretty bad, you can pair that up with, an Intimidate mon. For example, Lando T, obviously. Incineroar is also really, really good still. Yeah, and you just kind of like, you get the 1 or 2 Intimidates down, you get up a Quiver Dance, you start out speeding everything. If you get low, you Giga Drain, obviously you cycle and things like Rillaboom. And you basically just sit there and just like become unkillable, and then also just start one-shotting everything with like a Quiver Dance plus Heat Wave or like Fiery Dance, as we said before, right? I think this one's, it's just so good, man. Like I really think Volcarona is going to rise up and see a lot of success. And yeah, this one's like fantastic. And I guess in terms of the way you would play it, I guess I'll run through some like EVs real quick. I personally like hitting at least 137. If you don't want to run it that fast, 127 is like 128 is also like really, really solid. I think just hitting like one Spadef bump is like fine. Like honestly, something like that with like Quiver Dance is great. If you really, really care about like your physical bulk as well, something like that is probably like honestly okay, right? Go like maybe like 27 here, 106 there. Again, if you wanted, you could probably play this thing bold, but I do think you kind of want a little bit of damage out of like out of this mon, right? Because like Modest hitting a bump, you set up 2 Quiver Dances, all of a sudden this mon is just running through teams, right? But I do think like the main thing really is how fast do you want to run it. And to me, like as I said, personally, I like to run mine fast. I like to go around 137 minimum, and then you can kind of just pump into defense. And I also really like this number 2 because I always talk about diminishing returns, but hitting half of your HP stat is like optimal. So having like 96, 96 times 2 is 192. So having that, yeah, it's just a nice thing to have. It's very good. And then you obviously pair that up with like Flame Body, which obviously means, if they make contact, there's a 30% chance you burn them. And having the Dragon Territory obviously helps out a lot with that. And then of course you pair this thing with Intimidate, you pair this with like, Intim plus Rillaboom cycling, and all of a sudden Volcarona becomes a raid boss that absolutely sweeps through and you just can't kill it. Fantastic one, honestly. Now, this next one here is no surprise to anyone, I'm sure. Most of you probably are wondering why I even have it on the list. That's old Ironhands here. Now, Ironhands is doing the same thing it did back in regulation, I forget if it was D or E, but basically there was one regulation where for the first month it fell off, no one was using it, people were just like, oh, maybe like Ironhands is done. Ironhands isn't done, guys. I'm telling you right now, this is not a done Pokemon. If you look at this, HP stat, dummy. Attack stat, dummy. Defense stat, really good with this HP stat. This one's biggest issue is it's like bad Spadef, right? But how do you fix bad Spadef? You just dump it in there and you call it a day, right? This one has access to Fake Out, yeah? Has access obviously to like Wild Charge and Drain Punch, right? Does a lot of cool stuff. It likes the Assault Vest, yeah? That's basically how people have been playing it for the most part. But what I'm going to talk about today is actually a really, really cool set for it, which I think is the Booster Energy set plus Close Combat. Basically, what this allows you to do, right, is if you run, I think it was off memory, 156 Adamant, even at -1, this still just one-shots, this just still one-shots, what's his name, Incineroar. I do think you may technically need to run faster. I don't know the math off the top of my head, but you obviously want to make sure you get the attack boost, so you may have to run max just so that like if you get intimidated, you don't get the defense boost on the booster energy here. I would have to double check the math on that. Unfortunately, I'm not too sure of it off the top of my head. That might still be okay if you just go something like this. But again, worth double checking. But yeah, this is still like a really, really cool mon. With Close Combat in particular, I think it's fantastic. I do think it probably thrives best right now on Trick Room. I've seen a lot of it paired with like things like Farafari. Also Porygon 2 is another like really, really good partner for it because basically, you Fake Out, you get up your Trick Room, and then you kind of just start sweeping through with like CC. Because like while obviously Drain Punch gives you like more sustain, right? You are talking about a move that is like what, 45 base power higher. So there's a lot of KOs you just pick up that you used to not. And then two, if you want as well, instead of wild charge, it's like supercell slam. It's basically just like jump kick, but electric, right? There's a 5% chance you miss, but there's no drawback as long as you hit. So that's also like, you know, another little power bump it gets over wild charge. I would personally just run wild charge. But yeah, going for something like that, like CC, you know, these 4 moves here, if you really wanted to go like detect in this slot. But I do think this mod is like fantastic. In terms of Terra, obviously you kind of just want to get away from that fairy weakness. As long as you're not fairy weak, I think this mod's fine. Fire honestly isn't too bad. The biggest issue with like fire is keeping your ground weakness. And that's kind of really the main issue with any fairy resist, right? Is any fairy resist is still weak to ground, right? Whether that be poison, steel, or fire, right? They're all weak to ground. So that's why neutral typings like grass and water are also really, really solid. But again, it comes down to how you want to play it. I personally like fire, that way you can't get burnt. But there really isn't that much burn running around right now outside of Volcarona anyway. But yeah, guys, look, don't forget Ironhands. This one is still really good. Don't sleep on it. It is still one of the best Pokemon in the game. And I'm sure by the time, you know, probably like a month or two from now, halfway through Regulation F, we'll probably see Ironhands back up to a, you know, probably that top 10 status that I truly think it deserves. So the next one here is another one that I kind of feel like it's very similar to Golden Go. Just quite doesn't have the, you know, the same success as Golden Go, and that's Calibur. And what I mean by that is I feel like Calibur is a mon that never starts off hot in a format, but always by the end of a format, people are like, hey, Calibur is still that guy. This guy is still really good. And I think in a metagame right now, where Intimidate is super good, and the ice typing offensively is also insanely good, Calibur will always be good. Why is that? Well, because, well, one, obviously we have, you know, our good friend, Clear Amulet, basically saying, hey, Incineroar, you can't intimidate me, you can't parting shot me, and if I ever switch, you know, this in on a Flare Blitz, I get +1, and it feels pretty damn scary. Its signature move as well, being Glavis Rush, is also a ridiculous nuke. This thing is like essentially no drawback, especially if you pair it up with things like obviously, you know, Protect plus Ice Shard, because basically the way this works, for anyone who doesn't know, is user takes sure 2x damage until its next turn. I believe if you Ice Shard, you get rid of that 2x weakness. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. And this mod is also just like a really good Sword Stancer, right? So there are a couple different sets you can run. You can obviously, you know, if you don't want to run Clear Amulet, there's obviously the loaded dice set as well with Icicle Spear plus, why can't I think of it? The Dragon move Scale Shot. That's also really, really good. But personally, the reason I love the Ice Shard set so much with Clear Amulet is you can just pick up no bulk Landorus's, for example, just one shot them easy. It also puts a lot of pressure on Landor Eye as well. And this one's bulky enough where you can actually just live Landor Eye's attacks, you know, as long as you've got enough investment. So I do think Calibur is like super, super good right now. This is a mon that I think pairs incredibly well with Ninetales, which is again another sleeper mon right now, because I do think screens are actually pretty slept on, especially like, for me, I think the main thing is this metagame feels like it's slowing down a lot, right? Like there is obviously still a lot of hyper offense, but it's not the same kind of hyper offense we saw before. We are seeing, you know, the Rillabooms and the, you know, the Incineroars kind of just cycling around, being super annoying, kind of, you know, stalling added like a turn or two. So I do think having something like Calibur, pairing it, especially with Alola Ninetales, is like super good, right? Because Calibur in a metagame that's really physical, it gets like the free defense buff, you know, from the hail. It also, you know, it just says like, hey, I can get up screens with Alola Ninetales. Then you can also pair it up as well with things like your own, you know, Incineroars, right? And so like, hey, I'm going to click this SD. I'm going to have like Incineroar plus Rillaboom there. I'm going to cycle fake outs. I'm going to start Glavis rushing. I've got Protect. I've got Ice Shard. I'm doing a lot of damage. And this one is like, just honestly, it just does a lot. It's really, really sick, right? In terms of typing as well, I think Poison, like, again, this is like one of the biggest issues I still kind of have, right, is figuring out the exact perfect Terra type on this one. Because I do think obviously things like Poison and Steel are like really solid, and honestly I would probably go Poison for the most part. But with the rise of Landorus, like having Terra Poison when he's probably just going to Earth Power you anyway is pretty scary. But also in saying that as well, obviously if you ever get like +2 Shard, you're putting a lot of pressure on it. You're kind of forcing it into Terra. And the best thing about forcing it to Terra means that like any other, like for example Thunderclap coming out of like a Raging Bolt is always going to pick it up. And I do actually think Bax plus Bolt in Hail is like a really, really good combo, because again, even like Raging Bolt behind screens is like super bulky and super hard to deal with. So, you know, if that's what you're going for, right, is just like, you know, get up your Aurora Veil and then you've got like Bax or, you know, Bolt, like just setting up and then sweeping, it can be very, very scary, right? In terms of sets on this thing, I think you just kind of want to get as much attack out of this as possible, right? At least go to that final bump there with Adamant. If you want, go a little more. Speed always comes down to your team. If you're running with Alola Ninetales, I like to go at least 112, but I also like running, what's it called? Math, English here, Icy Wind. for speed control. So obviously having something like this is fine, because at this point, you know, it allows you to outspeed, you know, most of the base 100s. Sorry, all of the base 100s. And then in terms of defense here, you just probably go something like 2-2, right? Nothing too crazy. You could change this around if you want max, you know, like go up to like max here, and then kind of just like put this in a position where, like, honestly, that's like honestly fine, right? Something like that is okay. If you want to run it faster, run it faster. If you're running scale shot sets, obviously go like max speed. I guess for anyone who doesn't know, if you do want to run scale shot, you want to run max speed, because at +1 you outspeed flutter mains, which I do think is very, very important. But yeah, you can just go something like max here on the adamant. You know, just do that. It's very good. I honestly think this mon is like a super good anti-meta mon right now. Setup is fantastic, and ice type offensively is unreal. And having like, I'm pretty sure like +2 ice shard does like 70% to the bulkiest of flutter mains. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. If you get any chip on the flutter main, it just goes down to an ice shard, which is definitely really, really cool. Now, the final one I'm going to touch on here is actually Earthworm. Now, this might also sound like a bit of a controversial pick, because this mon is like super hit and miss, right? You'll see these teams that are like really successful with it, but you'll also just never see this mon really do anything, right? And the main reason I think this mon is really, really good is its signature move, Shed Tail. Obviously, we now have 3 Shed Tail mons. Actually, it might even be a 4th one, right? Because obviously Sceptile got it. I feel like a 4th one got it, right? Okay, no, it is just these guys, right? So yeah, Sceptile's the only new one. That's fine, right? So basically, the reason I think Earthworm is like the best of the 3 is like, one, Wall Cyclozar is cool. It's not as bulky, like stats wise. And Sceptile, as much as I love it, its ability is unburdened. So like, if you ever do pocket Citrus Berry, which is like normally what you want to run with Shed Tail, at that point it's kind of just like, damn, I really wish, you know, I really wish I had my unburden active. But Earthworm has, you know, this ridiculous defense stat. This right here is what I think actually makes Earthworm really, really good. In terms of item, I think lefties or citrus is obviously the way to go. And in terms of teammates, I think this mon pairs incredibly well with the Qian Power teams, right? Because one, you can go say for like the Qian Power Hyper Offense teams, this is. Because like normally you can pair this thing with like Entei and D-Knight. And basically when you pair it with D-Knight, right, you have another mon that's, you know, immune to ground moves. And when you pair it with Entei can get Bulldoze, right? So for example, like say you Shed Tail this into your D-Knight, have your Entei on the board, you can start going for bulldozers, reducing their speed, while your D-Knight kind of just sits behind a sub, right? In other ways as well, like, you know, if you got like, for example, just, you know, AV plus like Earthquake on your D-Knight, you can just like cycle in your Earthworm, basically heal it up with, you know, Earthquake. Same with like Entei as well, heal it up with your bulldozers. And yeah, I just think honestly Shed Tail is like super broken right now. It really helps, you know, that kind of setup I was talking about earlier. And this one is also an Iron Defense Body Press mod as well, which I do think is also like really, really good, right? You have Iron Defense, you have Body Press, and I think it also gets Heavy Slam as well. Like the only thing that this gets walled by is like Golden Go, right? But obviously you're pairing this with just Earthquake Spammers. So at that point, if he ever goes for his like Terror Dragon, he just loses to the Body Press from this thing if you ever get up to Iron Defense. But yeah, this is like another just like a really, really cool anti-meta mon, right? In terms of stats, you always want to go max HP. I'm always torn on exactly how you want to, I guess, EV this in terms of like going for Shed Tail. Because obviously, right, if you go like even like this, when you sub, you get your Citrus Berry. I believe if you have an odd number, you. No, I think that's wrong. I think you always get your Citrus Berry. I was gonna say you don't get your Citrus Berry, but also if you're an odd number as well, you will what's it called? You can actually click it twice, but then like Earth Eater comes into play. It's kind of awkward. I personally just run 177. Basically, what I'm trying to get at here. And then yeah, basically at this point you just kind of pump into Spadef. That's like the main thing with this one is just like pump into your Spadef. Get that up as high as you can. Honestly, I'm kind of torn on how I would run this. I think Impish is probably the best right now. If you wanted, obviously run like a plus Spadef nature, like I think I'm going for careful as well. It's like probably fine because you just want this mon to be as bulky on the Spadef side. And then obviously just like, you know, you can Iron Defense, you know, if you need to. Otherwise, you're just kind of passing Shed Tails and then cycling around, healing up with Earth Eater. But yeah, I do think this one's like super sick, and I think the core in particular it works on. It does really good, right? Even if, you know, if you're passing a Shed Tail to a Chen Pao, like especially because like obviously once you're behind the Shed Tail, you can't get intimidated too, which I think is like super sick. Or even you're passing it over to a D-Knight or an Entei. I just think everything this mon pairs with right now is like really good. And yeah, I think it's just a super cool pick, honestly. It's one of those mons that is just always super underrated. And honestly, I don't think it's explored enough. Yep, anyway guys, that is the 5 mons I think you should definitely be considering when building for early regulation F here. Obviously, you know, Ironhands is a mon that I think everyone knows is good, and eventually it will definitely come back into the metagame. Shifu is another mon that I think everyone kind of knows is good, it's just awkward to fit in. But Volcarona and Calibur in particular, I do think are the 2 mons everyone should be looking out for. I think these mons are both incredibly underrated right now. Obviously, we have seen Volk get, you know, a couple results in the past week, but I would definitely not be surprised if this thing skyrockets, because I do think Volcarona is like super underrated right now. But yeah, anyway, guys, that's going to be for this one. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.